We're going to unpack this a little bit more with the Sami Hamdi in London. He's the Managing Director of the International Interest. Welcome to the program, Sami. Is this economic crisis we're now seeing in Tunisia mainly due to Kais Said's takeover last year, or was this years in the making?
I think it's important to remember that in 2011, one of the key slogans that was presented by the people who took to the streets to overthrow Ben Ali was a call for an end to unemployment and a call for equal opportunities and a call for being lifted out of poverty. The idea being that the economy had reached a state in which the Tunisians could no longer bear it. And that's why Mohamed Bouazizi, when he burnt himself, he was a street vendor who was being prevented from selling his goods by one of the members of the police. The idea here being that the economy was bad in 2011 and has continued to deteriorate since 2011. There have already been two IMF bailouts, 2.6 billion and 1.8 billion, if I remember correctly, but two bailouts that have failed to solve any of the economic issues, primarily for two reasons. The first is that the trade unions in particular, who support Kais Said's coup and who lambast the economic situation, have constantly pressured the government to spend beyond its means. The trade unions have insisted on raising public sector salaries, knowing full well the implications that this has over the economy, and therefore public sector wages have tripled since 2011. The second reason is that the priorities of the successive governments have not necessarily been to tackle poverty, but primarily to reach some sort of accord with the barons and the elites who refuse to be brought to justice and who have essentially hamstrung the economy by failing to return much of the money that has been stolen. And that's why instead of going after them, we saw Parliament pass a law of financial reconciliation, allowing these businessmen to keep much of the money that was taken under the Ben Ali regime in exchange for them investing. And we also saw government bailouts for sectors that bailed out companies that are associated with corruption, such as those in the tourism industry. The idea here being that the focus has been more on protecting the interests of barons as opposed to actually dealing with the crux of the economic situation. And that's why you have the problem today in which the IMF is saying now that if we give you a third bailout, you must implement some of these austerity measures. But the ones that will bear the brunt of the austerity measures are those who are already suffering, those who do not have the means to make ends meet, those who cannot even afford access to healthcare. The idea being that subsidies would be lifted on fuel, subsidies would be lifted on bread, subsidies would be lifted on basic goods in the expectation that people somehow will still be able to afford those goods, without realizing that even with the subsidies, people are still struggling to afford these basic goods. So we're going into this cycle, this spiral of disaster with regards to the Tunisian economy, one in which that for those who are in charge, the policymakers, not just Kais Said, but those before him, the policy has genuinely been one of trying to find reconciliation with the barons,
Sami,
as opposed to taking revolutionary measures to really deliver change.
But Sami, doesn't Kais Said now then have the opportunity to do that? I mean, many people have obviously been very critical about his takeover in July last year. But if, according to what you're saying, he has this opportunity now to actually make a difference, to force the hands of the elites, as you say, and to actually make life better for the majority of people in his country.
The issue with Kais Said is that very soon after he implemented his coup, he demonstrated a lack of awareness over how an economy actually works, and actually ordered or summoned the head of the central bank and some of the heads of companies, and seemed to order them to bring the prices down without necessarily demonstrating any understanding as to why those prices are high, or indeed the physics of supply and demand, meaning that for many, he immediately lost the confidence of many of the economists who might have been able to help him with regard to tackling the economy. The second point to note is that Kais Said is very wary over the extent to which people actually support him. In the first round of the elections, he got 19%, and he's aware that his landslide victory was more a rejection of his opponent Nabil Al-Qaroui than an endorsement for Kais Said. The third point to note is that Kais Said is aware that the protests that enabled him to create an environment with which to embark on his coup, that environment came about as a result of frustration over high prices, over the state of the economy. Said is very wary of implementing necessary economic reforms that might exacerbate that situation, because he's aware that when you touch touch the pocket of the Tunisians or you touch their livelihood, their support tends to dissipate very quickly. And he's aware that in 2016, 2017, his predecessor, Youssef al-Shahid, who was the prime minister under Beji Qaid Sibsi, also had high poll ratings at 71%, 72%, when people believed that he was tackling corruption and that he was fighting some of the businessmen. But Shahid's support quickly plummeted when he lifted fuel subsidies and when he sought to implement some of the IMF's measures. So Said is caught in no man's land. He feels that his hands are tied, and this is why we see increased use of the security forces and repression of political opinion as opposed to actually genuine economic reform.
Sami Hamdi, appreciate your analysis, speaking to us there from London. Thank you, Sami.